Wow. Finally here. I mean, this isn't an official stream, but it is a recording video, which is great. Uh, for now, I'm waiting on my little seizures, so I figured why not start recording now before I get into an official stream, kind of get something uploaded on my channel. And I just wanted to watch some videos, and there was one that I just looked at, and I haven't watched, clicked on it or anything, so I'm going to retype it in, and I'll just offer my thoughts on that. So, it's about Saddam Hussein's purge. So, let's see. Let's check out this video. Yeah, right here.
We're in Iraq in 1979. The newly appointed president has called his fellow party members to a meeting in a local theatre hall in Baghdad. His name is Saddam Hussein. He's only been president for a little under a week, but Iraq is his, and he wants everyone to know. It's July, and the temperature...
None of them know, what's about to happen. I remember watching how Saddam, and this shit was crazy, man. And he would basically was just listing off people. This was insane.
outside is pushing 40 degrees Celsius. The hall is hot, blisteringly hot. As Saddam takes the stage, he takes his time, shuffles a few papers, looks at his notes. Shortly before their newly appointed president arrived, one of his men appeared on stage. A terrible plot against the president and against Iraq has been uncovered, he informed the crowd. A group of high-ranking party members has conspired to remove Saddam Hussein from power.
He was just contemplating. He's like, who should I really... should I call people out that aren't already on my list? You could just look on his face. He's looking at the crowd, looking at the people that are on his list.
And then he revealed, all the guilty parties are in this room. Right now. And now, the crowd sits frozen in silence. The president is in total control. Then, Saddam calls a man to the stage, and a tall, slender, middle-aged man starts walking down the aisle. His name is Muhi Adbek Hussein. He's part of the Revolutionary Command Council. He's a powerful man, but just a short while ago, he had opposed Saddam in a meeting. It was a mistake. He walks up onto the stage and stands behind a microphone. And then, slowly, he begins confessing. Confessing to crimes of wanting to overthrow Saddam Hussein. In the meantime, Saddam takes a seat by a long table full of microphones and lights a thick Cuban cigar. I was the one behind the plot against the new president, the man says. It was me who tried getting others to join in. But it's a lie. Nothing of what he admits on stage is true. What's really happened is that he's been thoroughly tortured and told that if he doesn't go up on that stage and say that he planned the plot against Saddam, the torturers will rape his wife and daughter right in front of him. He has no choice but to obey. And so he does. To save his family, Muhi lies about his own and his fellow party members' involvement in the plot to overthrow Saddam's new regime. Once he's finished, Saddam takes the floor. Again, Saddam is in no rush. He lights his cigar and then he asks out into the room. What means should be used against these traitors? You know the answer, he says after a pause. There is no other way than the sword. The terrified party members in the theatre hall begin to clap desperately. What else could they do? Saddam then gives an instruction to those assembled in the hall. When I have read out your name, you shall stand up, recite the party's slogan, and leave the room. And so he begins reading out names. One by one, they must rise from their seats, say the slogan, and then they are led out of the room. They haven't been told where they're going or what's waiting for them on the other side of the door, but they probably have an idea. Most of the people, though reluctantly, do as they're told. One man, however, is clearly confused at his name being called. Me? I haven't done anything, he shouts as he stands up. Saddam doesn't even bother to look at him. He just coolly repeats, when I have read out your name, you shall stand up, recite the party's slogan, and leave the room. And then, nothing. The man just lowers his head and shuffles out of the room. Saddam continues until he has called out 68 names. He smiles and thanks those remaining in the hall for their loyalty, and then everyone stands up and once again begins a desperate standing ovation. Relief. Some even begin to cry. Up on the stage, even Saddam himself sheds a tear. Outside the hall, all the people whose names Saddam has called out are gathered in trucks and driven to prison. In the following days, 68 trials are held. 22 men, including 5 members of the Revolutionary Command Council, are sentenced to death. Saddam has appointed a number of executioners to complete the task of carrying out the executions. They're all members of the Ba'ath Party, his party, and none of them are executioners. They are then gathered in the building where the plotters allegedly should have laid their plans to overthrow Saddam's new regime. And then the condemned are dragged out into the adjoining yard where they are forced to their knees and blindfolded. Each of the executioners is then handed a weapon and assigned a victim. And while they prepare to murder their former party comrades, they can hear the sound of a large crowd gathering outside the building. Saddam wants to make sure that everyone knows what will happen to people who disobey, but most importantly, he wants to show his accomplices, willing or not. So Saddam has made sure that there's a demonstration at the same time as the executions, and it's a big one. Thousands of Iraqis gather with signs and flags, shouting praises to their new president and condemning the prisoners. And then, one by one, Saddam's former friends and fellow party members are shot. Some executioners are so nervous and scared that they miss and need to shoot their victims several times. It's gruesome, but Saddam is very satisfied. An excellent start to his presidential career, he thinks to himself. And so the first official order of the newly appointed president of Iraq has been carried out. What could be the next?
5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
It's insane, man. It's crazy stuff going on in the world right now. You know, sometimes I believe like we live in a simulation, and it's stuff like that is just like insane. And I feel like that's one of the like more powerful videos I've ever seen, because like you kind of got like in this, it was on live TV and people were basically watching a whole purge. And I think it's really important to watch videos like that, so you can see like the insanity of man. Let's look at this one. This one's, I have not seen this yet, so let's see what this is. Actually, I have
Some dungeon
I know
entrances
about
in
this
Top
story.
Heroes are super sneaky.
It's been a while since
At Sentry Tower, most players just grab the chest and leave.
It's the middle of December 1989. We're in the Palace Square in Bucharest, and it's nearly freezing. Over 50,000 people have been brought here. Many were taken straight from schools or their workplaces. Some have been standing in the cold for more than 5 hours, and they're all waiting for one man, Nicolae Ceausescu. For 24 years, he's ruled Romania with an iron fist. A few days earlier, protests broke out in Timișoara after a local priest criticised Ceausescu. When locals resisted his arrest, Ceausescu's soldiers opened fire. Now, news have spread and protests are erupting across the country. Desperate to restore his image, Ceausescu calls for a mass rally in Bucharest to be broadcast live on national television. It'll be the biggest mistake of his life. Ceausescu steps out onto the balcony as he waves to the audience to the sound of almost deafening cheers. But something's off. Almost everyone in the crowd is standing completely still, except for a few people in the front rows. The cheering is fake. It's actually a pre-recorded track blasting from huge speakers around the square.
That's insane.
Then, Ceausescu starts his speech. And at first, things seem to be going rather well.
It's actually
But then,
all those
Just as he's in the middle of thanking the organisers of the rally, screams can be heard from somewhere back in the crowd. This is not part of the pre-recorded track. Someone is shooting, his wife Elena shouts.
I don't think I've seen this.
They're entering the building, his security guard says. Off camera, demonstrators have broken through barriers and are heading toward the Central Committee building right where Ceausescu is standing. The cameraman has had specific instructions to point it toward the sky if something unexpected happens. The demonstrators are now directly below Ceausescu, and both him and Elena are shouting at them, telling them to stay back. This is a provocation, Nikolai says to himself, as he and his wife continue to shout at the demonstrators. Somehow, the security guards actually manage to push the crowd back behind the barriers. But it's too late. And even as Ceausescu continues his speech by announcing sudden wage increases and higher pensions, after the speech ends, many in the crowd refuse to go home. They've had enough of the lies, the repression, and of Ceausescu. They spread through Bucharest, shouting things like, "Down with Ceausescu," and calling for freedom. And when Ceausescu hears of this, he's outraged. Still in Bucharest, he orders tanks, soldiers, and his very own secret police to crush the protests by any means necessary. And so, they do. Protesters are shot in the streets, and those who've barricaded themselves are hit by snipers positioned on top of many of the buildings. By morning, there's so much blood in the streets that the military needs to hose it with huge water cannons just to get it off the asphalt. Meanwhile, Ceausescu is still in Bucharest, and he's relieved. He's convinced that the uprising has been crushed. Surely, now, everything will be back to normal, he tells his wife, Elena. But he's wrong. Before dawn, the first reports come in that massive columns of workers are leaving their factories and heading toward the city centre. And something's changed. The soldiers and police sent out to control them suddenly refuse to shoot, and actually join the protesters instead. Ceausescu immediately holds a crisis meeting with the remaining members of the Communist Party's Politburo in the Central Committee building. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of demonstrators now surround the Central Committee headquarters, and they're starting to break in. With protesters minutes away from reaching their offices, Ceausescu orders his pilot to bring a helicopter to the roof. Both Nikolai and Elena are visibly shaken and have to be carried aboard by their bodyguards. Their faces are completely drained of colour. Together with two senior officials and two bodyguards, they squeeze into the helicopter and take off minutes before the protesters reach the rooftop. The pilot immediately heads toward Ceausescu's residence in Snagov, north of the city. Here, Nikolai desperately tries to summon military assistance and orders the pilot to get two helicopters with soldiers as an escort. The answer from the other end, however, is clear. They're on their own. No one's coming to help. The pilot convinces the Ceausescus to take off again quickly, leaving the two officials behind to lighten the load. Nikolai instructs the pilot to fly toward the western city of Titu, hoping to reach a loyal garrison. But suddenly, a message crackles over the radio. All flights are grounded. Any unidentified aircraft will be shot down. And so they have to land. The pilot puts them down by a road between Bucharest and Târgoviște. And with that, the Ceausescus now find themselves on their own, with just two security guards. After a while, they manage to hijack a passing car, a bicycle mechanic who drives them toward the town of Târgoviște. On the way, the Ceausescus listen in horror as the car radio plays a news report about the uprising's victory in Bucharest. The bicycle mechanic, Petrișor, suggests they hide at an agricultural institute on the outskirts of the city. When they arrive, the institute director shoves the couple into a room and locks the door, trapping them inside.
Damn, bro.
Shortly after, local police arrest both Ceausescus and hand them over to a nearby military barracks in the city, for the next few days. The new government is determined to bring both to trial as quickly as possible. And so, the day after their capture, Iliescu, the new head of state, signs a decree establishing an extraordinary military tribunal to be carried out immediately at the barracks where they're held. Here, they're accused of genocide, of destroying the country's economy, and attempting to flee with over $1 billion in foreign banks. As their crimes are read to them, Nikolai simply laughs. The trial is brief and largely for show. It lasts about 2 hours and takes place without any real possibility for defence or appeal. Ceausescu himself refuses to recognise the court and calls it illegal. But it doesn't matter. The tribunal finds both him and Elena guilty. The sentence for both is death by firing squad, and the execution will happen immediately. Straight away, Nikolai tries to appeal the decision, but he's denied. Before being led out of the room, Nikolai turns to the guards and says he wants to be executed alongside Elena. They accept. Meanwhile, a soldier returns with rope to tie their hands, but neither Nikolai nor Elena wants to be restrained. Both argue with the soldiers, saying there's no need for it and that they're not going to run. But again, they're denied. They're then led out into the courtyard and placed against a wall to the barracks. Elena begins to scream insults at the execution squad in rage. Other accounts say that she starts crying. Nikolai, on the other hand, remains relatively calm in his final seconds and begins singing the first line of the Internationale, the workers' international battle song. The very next day, Romanian television shows footage of the two bodies at the foot of the barracks wall as final proof that the Ceausescus are gone. In May 1990, Romania held its first free elections since 1937. Over the next 2 decades, it joined NATO, entered the European Union, and began rebuilding.
What's crazy is that the Soviet Union you'd think they would have gotten involved. Gaddafi.
The Shakaroni's back at Papa John's with more pepperonis and over half a pound of cheese.
So many orders, we had to staff up.
I am here to work, people. Where's the garlic sauce?
Is he always here? He's everywhere. We're making...
Let's take a listen again after 40 years. The leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi.
This is Muammar Gaddafi, brother leader, king of kings, and guide of the revolution of the great socialist people's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. He's a man of many titles. Right now, he's speaking at the United Nations General Assembly. Normally, you're given about 15 minutes to speak, but Gaddafi's been speaking for more than an hour and a half. During this time, he's covered everything from the financial crisis to conspiracy theories on the assassination of JFK. All of a sudden, his translator that he's brought with him from Libya is replaced.
This solution, the two-state solution, is not...
Behind the scenes, the original translator has had enough of having to translate Gaddafi's extremely long rant. So he quits. It's all happening live on air.
Partition.
At this point, Gaddafi's been the leader of Libya for nearly 40 years. He came to power during the Vietnam War. And now, during the age of YouTube and Facebook, he seems ancient, a relic. He's the last of his generation of Arab dictators, Hafez el-Assad of Syria, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. All are gone. Gaddafi, however, has endured. But now more than ever, he's the image of a man out of his time. He has a penchant for designer sunglasses, expensive snakeskin boots, and Botox. He's also just finished designing his very own supercar. And when he travels, he lives in a huge Bedouin tent where he sleeps, eats, and receives his guests. During his visit to the United Nations General Assembly, he tried to pitch it in the middle of Central Park. Publicly, Gaddafi denies that he holds any official position at all. He's a brotherly leader, a guide of Libya, governed by and for the people. It's a lie, of course.
Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, just 32 years old, the ruler of oil-rich Libya. Gaddafi came to power just 4 years ago when he deposed the aging King Idris.
Oil has made Libya rich. In his first decade in power, Gaddafi spends nearly 25% of the national budget on weapons. He buys around 4,000 tanks, 350 fighter jets, 6 submarines, and 2 frigates from the Soviets. From the French, he orders an additional 150 fighter jets, and from the Italians, he buys transport planes, helicopters, naval ships, and missiles. And so, Libya, a country that at the time had less than 3 million people, ends up with an air force as big as the French. During his military spending spree, Gaddafi declares the beginning of a new age for Libya. He names it the Cultural Revolution and declares Libya a Jamahiriya, a state of the masses. It's not capitalist or communist, but something else entirely. Power, he claims, now lies with the people. He later outlines the details in his manifesto, the Green Book, named after the colour which, in Islam, represents prosperity, life and paradise. He also makes sure the flag matches his new state. The first order of his cultural revolution is to make sure that no one can or will oppose the new regime. Intellectuals, political rivals, dissidents, and anyone critical of his ideas are simply too risky to keep around. So, in the early 70s, Gaddafi orders a purge on anyone that the regime deems an enemy of the state. Mass arrests of activists, journalists, and even students take place all around the country. Summary trials are held by new, so-called revolutionary committees, followed by public executions that are broadcast live on TV. He even hires secret police agents from communist East Germany to train and work with the Mukhabarat, Gaddafi's new internal intelligence agency, who are tasked with tracking down anyone who might speak against the colonel at home or abroad. In a few short years, he's turned Libya into an extreme surveillance state, so pervasive that neighbours inform on neighbours. Friends turn in friends. To hold his now growing number of prisoners, Gaddafi constructs dozens of prisons across Libya. Among these, Abu Salim prison is the most notorious. Everyone in Libya knows that if you're sent to Abu Salim, you don't return. Visiting families are, more often than not, denied entry, and most don't even know if their relatives are even alive. It quickly becomes known as the slaughterhouse. Publicly, Gaddafi issues several declarations that advocate human rights, personal freedoms, and criticise the West for their weapons of mass destruction, while calling for a nuclear-free Middle East. But by the end of the 80s, Gaddafi has been actively collecting the building blocks for his own nuclear program for almost 2 decades. Just a few years later, Libya has its very own chemical weapons facility near the capital, Tripoli. Reported to cover an area of approximately 10 square kilometres, it is one of the largest in the world. According to several defectors from the Libyan army, at least one of Gaddafi's generals is quick to make use of the new facility by launching poison gas attacks against Libya's southern neighbour, Chad. Abroad, Gaddafi supports any group that challenges what he sees as colonialist or imperialist powers. To him, there's no difference between the IRA, the ANC, or the Japanese Red Army. He even personally sponsors a British union leader during a strike, simply because he sees him as a challenge to Margaret Thatcher, who he hates. But that's not all. The Libyan government openly admits responsibility for deadly attacks on 2 international flights in Scotland and Naishir, as well as a nightclub in Germany.
After that, it went downhill.
Perhaps more than anyone, Gaddafi lives by the notion of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And, bizarrely, that same logic eventually draws him close to his old nemeses, the US and Britain. By the end of the 90s, Gaddafi's been stacking up sanctions that have cost Libya a staggering $18 billion due to his campaigns of violence both at home and abroad. At the same time, as their war on terror gets underway at the start of the new millennium, the British and American intelligence services find themselves suddenly cooperating with Gaddafi. He can give them valuable intelligence and also provide a way in to the Middle East. And he does. In return, Libya's sanctions are lifted almost from one day to another. They even help deliver Gaddafi's opponents into Libyan jails. The relationship of Gaddafi and the West is dizzying, to say the least. One moment he's a villain, the next a friend. Then, at the start of 2011, the world turns on its axis one more time. This is one of Gaddafi's last televised speeches. It's February 2011, and the Arab Spring, sparked by anger over decades of corruption, political oppression, and dictatorship, is sweeping through North Africa. The camera's panning across a war-torn building and one of Gaddafi's infamous statues of a fist crushing a US fighter jet to prove he's still in Libya, despite rumours of his escape to Venezuela. Gaddafi's grip on the country is slipping, and now protests against him are erupting across Libya. He's clearly emotional, angry, and quite obviously, delusional. Any act of insurrection, he says, will be punishable by execution. Then he delivers his final threat. We and millions from the Sahara will cleanse Libya inch by inch, house by house, home by home, alleyway by alleyway, person by person, until the country is cleansed of dirt and scum. This is Gaddafi still playing the role of Libya's absolute ruler, the role he's been playing for more than 40 years. But the Libya he thinks he commands no longer exists, and his words, alleyway by alleyway, or zenga zenga in Arabic, take on a life of their own. Across eastern Libya, people shout it jokingly. They even turn it into a song. We can't play it due to copyright, but it's on YouTube and definitely worth a watch. Suddenly Britain, France, and America have a problem. Just months ago, Gaddafi was their ally. Both American and British oil companies have valuable oil contracts with Libya, and British arms manufacturers supply the regime. And now, as protests sweep the Arab world, they look ineffective at best and complicit at worst. And while the rebellion against Gaddafi starts out strong, the rebels quickly find themselves outmatched and outgunned. In Misrata, artillery shells from Gaddafi's cannons fall every 6 minutes. Doctors work by candlelight in hospitals filled with the screams of the dying. Civilians cower in basements as Gaddafi's tanks roll through their neighbourhoods. The rebels, who've never known protest, let alone war, have no option but to retreat. In the United Nations, debates rage over how to respond. China, Germany, India and Russia express concerns about sovereignty and the risks of foreign meddling. On the other hand, the US, backed by France, the UK and a coalition of Western and Arab nations, argue that intervention is necessary to prevent a humanitarian disaster and protect Libyan civilians. It's a mishmash of alliances and competing interests. It's confusing and a political nightmare, and as a result, the United Nations are slow to react. But, around the middle of March, the United Nations finally authorize international intervention, and within days, NATO airstrikes hit Gaddafi's forces, targeting airfields, armoured columns, and supply lines. Gaddafi's advantage begins to unravel. Behind the scenes, British MI6 agents and French intelligence operatives work directly with the rebels and provide critical intelligence on Gaddafi's troop movements. NATO's overwhelming air power also helps to dismantle Gaddafi's forces, and by August, the rebels finally seize Tripoli. Gaddafi, who's been hiding in Tripoli, is forced to flee to Sirte, where he moves from villa to villa with the last of his fighters and advisors still loyal to him. Reports suggest that he's becoming increasingly detached from reality, convinced that the Libyan people still love him. But by October, the end is near. Sirte, now reduced to rubble by NATO airstrikes and weeks of fierce fighting, offers few places to hide. So, his son Mutassim organises a heavily armoured convoy of dozens of vehicles carrying around 200 armed fighters. Their plan is to reach the desert, where Gaddafi wants to make his last stand. But almost as soon as they hit the road, a NATO missile hits the front of the convoy just ahead of Gaddafi's four-wheel drive. Gaddafi, along with Mutassim, a small group of bodyguards, and his defence minister, abandons the convoy and flees on foot. As they fight off the encroaching rebels, they take shelter in a drainage pipe near the road. They're now completely surrounded. Suddenly, a large bang echoes from within the pipe. A grenade has exploded and bits of dust and cement shoot out of the opening. Wounded and confused, Gaddafi emerges from the pipe. The rebels run at him, guns firing, as the now former dictator asks his captors, "What's wrong with you? What's happening?" They're his final recorded words. In Washington, President Obama is among the first to celebrate the fall of the regime, and he's quick to declare it a warning to other authoritarian leaders. But the US doesn't actually have any real idea of what to do with Libya in the aftermath. Years later, he will candidly admit that the lack of planning for post-Gaddafi Libya was the worst mistake of his presidency. In London, David Cameron calls Gaddafi's death Libya's first step toward democracy. But his words fall flat against Britain's very recent history with the regime, and a relationship built on oil contracts and pragmatic diplomacy. Meanwhile, in Paris, Nicolas Sarkozy's celebrations faces its own contradictions, as reports begin to surface about Gaddafi's alleged financing of his 2007 presidential campaign. And in Libya, the power vacuum left by Gaddafi is felt immediately. The country splinters into warring factions. Militias armed with weapons that flooded the country during the uprising battle for control, and the very Western powers that were so decisive in their intervention suddenly appear less certain about reconstruction. Within 6 to 12 months after Gaddafi's death, their focus shifts elsewhere, leaving Libya to grapple with its newfound freedom on its own.
A mistake, because he was actually trying to push for the West in his final years. And I think what sent over, oh, we can rebuild and stuff like that and take a dictator out of power. And, you know, this happened with Saddam Hussein too. And, you know, you saw those dictators really did keep factions in check. I think it's a great thing that happened. Do I think they were great leaders? No, I don't. But they did keep the radical factions in check, and now you got more brutal leadership, civil wars, like the Libyan Civil War and stuff like that. It's just, it's terrible. And, you know, the USA at the time was just like, you know, let's get involved everywhere. And it's one of the main reasons why we're in massive debt. One of the reasons, I wouldn't say our debt, a lot of our debt comes from, you know, Social Security, all that other stuff. Medicare, food stamps, EBT, Section 8 housing. That's where our massive debt comes from. But there's a good portion of it comes from nation building in countries that don't want a nation build in our way. So well, that's it for this pre-video. My pizza is on its way now, finally, and I'm going to be live streaming later, and I'll upload that video too once it's done onto YouTube. And I'll be playing Star Wars The Old Republic MMO, one of my favorite games of all time. I'm replaying it for Twitch. So, yeah, thank you.